This podcast features criminologists discussing sensitive themes and topics. Listener discretion is advised. A seemingly innocent online romance becomes a sinister plot with many shocking twists and turns. This is the Kirat Assi story. Hi, Amy.
Meghan, you've been doing a lot of these twisty cases lately.
I think that I'm drawn to them. I think these are more my, I have a couple of different types of cases, but I think the surprise, the shocking twists and turns, I'm definitely drawn to. I don't know if you were, but I was always drawn to mysteries.
Yeah. No, I'm here for it. I love it. Your Cindy James case from back in the day, I thought that not many cases could be as twisty as that. But Ruth Finley, I think it was an exclusive, right, on Patreon. It was.
Yes.
Did you see how many people wrote? They were like, what?
I couldn't believe. I worked really hard on that case.
It was good.
Because it was one of those cases where there was a very, very shocking turn. And I couldn't believe how many people wrote in and really appreciated that and the way, that I told the story. I'm so glad that I was able to convey it correctly. But yes, I'm drawn to these types of cases. The case that I'm covering today was covered more extensively. It was a serialized case in the podcast Sweet Bobby, which I know I have mentioned to you before, but I don't want to say too much about it now because I'm not going to give away the storyline. I'm sure that I've referenced it in other episodes and to you because it was a podcast that I got sucked into and thought was one of the best ones I've listened to.
I've never listened to it. I'm glad I didn't because I know nothing about this case.
Yes. Okay. Well, I'm glad you didn't listen to, but I don't know if you realize how pushy I was trying to be about you listening to it.
I know, but good
Kind
thing.
of like when you call me up, have you listened to this Dax episode or whatnot? I was trying to be just as pushy, but that's okay.
I'm glad I didn't listen because now I can hear it for the first time.
Absolutely. And after listening to it, of course, I started my own research. I had to. I discovered many online sleuths who were super interested in Kirat's case and what happened to the others involved. There has been so much speculation. Also, a lot of opinions, which you may or may not agree with, and which I will absolutely discuss through the course of this episode. In the end, though, let me just assure you, Amy, right now that you will still have questions. But we will also have a very interesting conversation about the why this happened. That I can also promise you. So I won't hype this any further. Let's begin by meeting the focus of today's episode, Kirat Assi. The events we'll be discussing today began in 2010. And at this time, Kirat was 32 years old. While her full name is Kirat Assi, most people call her Kirat or Kiki. Since Kiki feels a little personal, I'm going to go with Kirat. Kirat was born in Hounslow, England, which is a large suburban district located in outer western London. She grew up with her parents and her two younger brothers. At the time of our events, Kirat was a full-time events operation manager. And while very successful at her job, she also had a second part-time job as a radio presenter for Desi Radio.
That's fun.
Well, she did this once a week. It was kind of a cool show. It was like a community engagement show. I listened to a little bit. She takes listener questions, does what's going on, what's happening right now. And it's really just a fun engagement show. And let me tell you, while we never know how someone feels about their job or their second job or their third job, it was obvious to me that Kirat was a natural presenter. She's very warm. She's very engaging. She's very inviting. And I can totally see why she had a great radio presence. By her own admission, while life wasn't perfect, it was pretty good. She was busy and she felt really fulfilled and very content. Now, Kirat also had strong family ties, particularly to her younger female cousin, Simran. Interestingly, from what I gathered, while the two hadn't really grown up together, they became very close when Kirat was an adult. It's unclear why this is. Perhaps Simran's family just didn't live nearby until they were older, so I'm not sure why the connection later in life. But nevertheless...
Sorry, how far in age were they?
Yeah, that's a good question. When Simran was a teenager, so I would say when they really got close, and when Simran was about 16, Kirat had about 10 years on her. So she was probably about 26 at the time.
So I don't know if you know my cousin Sam, who I talk fondly about often. Me and Sam are 13 years apart, and we didn't get close until our adult years. Because
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
yeah, because we're so far apart in age. But now she's an adult. She lives in the city. She has an awesome job. Yeah.
Oh, that's very cool. Okay. So
I
she's
get it.
obviously the younger one because she's living in the city with a cool job.
Oh my God, has the coolest life. Yes.
Okay. Well, I think that was definitely the case here. I think that Simran also kind of looked up to Kirat because Kirat did have this cool life. So I think she looked at her like an older sister, but aspired kind of to the lifestyle that Kirat had. And they formed, by Kirat's description, what she would call a sisterly bond. Now, in 2009, just a year before the events we're discussing, Simran began dating a young man by the name of JJ. Both were still in high school, so I don't think it's a big surprise that Simran decided to end their relationship when she went off to college. That's pretty normal. But JJ was devastated by this. He was absolutely heartbroken and looking for advice on how he could possibly win Simran back.
Aw.
So he contacted Kirat because he knew that Kirat was like an older sister to her, and he was just looking for, again, any way to find a way back to his high school sweetheart. I can relate to this. I also had a high school sweetheart, and our breakup was pretty devastating. He was a year older than me, and he left for the army.
Oh.
I was pretty heartbroken.
I, too, had a high school boyfriend, and he went off to Penn State, and we tried to make it work, but just it doesn't work all the time.
I know. If only you know at that time. You could tell your younger self that it'll be okay and that you'll move on, right?
Oh, my God.
So, like most of us in the mid-2000s, Kirat had a Facebook account. And so the heartbroken JJ reached out to Kirat through Messenger, asking for advice on what he should do about Simran. Now, Kirat said that JJ was just a sweet young man, and so she gave him some kind of friendly or sisterly advice a few times, and she kind of allowed him a shoulder to lean on while he got through his feelings about the breakup. She said that she also remembered what it was like to be a teenager in love and to be a bit heartbroken. And I have to tell you, this was in keeping with Kirat's personality, as according to her friends, it was no surprise that Kirat offered to help. She is, as her friends described, the kind-hearted, caring person who is absolutely there for anyone who needs her. Sympathetic.
Sorry, Meghan, I have to just share because I keep laughing to myself. Do you remember the song Save Tonight by Eagle Eye Cherry?
Of course.
So when my boyfriend and my best friend's boyfriend went away to college, we would drive around, just cry and listen to that song. I'm like, what are you doing? You want to go for a drive?
Oh,
it's so
sad.
It's so like 90s and 2000s. Yeah.
Oh. Well, then we can both really relate to the way that, JJ felt.
So they didn't end up getting back together, JJ and Simran?
No, they didn't.
Okay.
And though Kirat's interactions with JJ were brief, she was absolutely shocked to find out that a short time after she had conversed with him, JJ died of an allergic reaction.
Oh.
Which again was just totally a sad turn of events. And Kirat, she felt terribly, but she hadn't known JJ all that well, and Simran seemed to be doing okay. So while Kirat said she felt terrible for the family, she and Simran also went on with their lives as well. However, about a month or so after JJ's death, Kirat received a Facebook message from a man named Bobby. Who's Bobby? Well, he was JJ's older brother.
Sorry, is Bobby Sweet Bobby of the Sweet Bobby podcast?
That is absolutely correct.
Okay, let's hear who this guy is.
So he was JJ's older brother. And the reason he's reaching out to Kirat is because he wanted to thank her for being so kind to his brother before his brother had passed. Apparently, JJ had told Bobby about the relationship with Simran, how it ended, and how Kirat had just been really kind, really understanding, and really helpful to him. And while Bobby wasn't really an acquaintance of Kirat's, she'd seen photos of him on Facebook, and she knew who he was. They were both part of the Sikh religious community, and Kirat said that this was a small world where everybody knew everybody, even if you didn't know them directly. So while she didn't personally know Bobby, like she hadn't met him at the time, She knew who he was. She'd seen pictures of him. She'd heard people describe him. And obviously knowing that Bobby was grieving the loss of his brother, Kirat responded to his message. But this message exchange wasn't just a one-off. Bobby continued to message Kirat, and over time, casually and slowly, the two built an online relationship. Or friendship, you might say.
How old is he in comparison to her?
She was a little bit older then. Kirat was, about, I'd say 29. And I want to say Bobby was right around the same age.
Okay.
Now, at the time, Kirat also didn't believe that Bobby was romantically interested in her. It was just friendly messaging. After all, Bobby was an accomplished cardiac surgeon with a wife and a child on the way. And Kirat said that while he was absolutely mourning the loss of his brother, he was also very excited about the birth of his first baby. So he was upfront with this information. And again, she didn't feel some type of romantic interest. But the happiness that seemed to paint his personal life did not last forever. Bobby slowly revealed that his life with his wife was sort of falling apart. Even though they were excited for this upcoming child, things were not working out well, and he was likely on the verge of a divorce. Now, this didn't come out right away. This came out slowly. Kirat felt for him, knowing how traumatic the year had been on his family, but she still didn't feel that he was using this information to try to establish a romantic connection with her.
Was she single at this time?
So Kirat was off and on single. She had a partner. She describes her ex-partner, and they were off and on again.
Okay.
I don't know how serious it was or was not at the time. Now, just for a little background on Facebook, I know sometimes we mention it back in our youth, but in 2010, Facebook Messenger wasn't the instant message machine that it is today. I don't know if you remember this, but it was much more like email messages. So you would send someone a message, but it was a form of email and not the instant replies.
And it wasn't as automatic, where now you get a messenger, it's almost like a text message, but then you have to log in and check it, usually from a computer. Correct.
Exactly. So the messages that Bobby and Kirat were exchanging, they weren't daily messages, and they certainly weren't 100 a day. It would be an email type message every maybe couple of days. As Kirat said, there was absolutely nothing at all overwhelming about the number of messages Bobby sent to her or the frequency of their interaction. She described it as casual kind of conversation. But a few months later, in the spring of 2011, Kirat was at a bar club in Brighton, England, celebrating a friend's bachelorette party, which they also call hen parties, which I thought was very cute. And she was shocked to spot Bobby across the dance floor. While she didn't know where Bobby lived, I guess they'd never exchanged exact locations, she thought it was a fun coincidence that he would be at this bar because Brighton is about, as I understand it, or as I looked it up, 65 miles from London. And this is 1:30 in the morning at a Brighton bar far from where she lived. So what a coincidence, right?
Is it possible he lived in that area?
Absolutely. But what she said was she just didn't know that he did.
Yeah.
So she thought, oh my gosh, this is such a fun coincidence. So of course she decided to say hello in person. Now it was late and the bar was crowded. It was very loud. And so when Kirat went over to say hello, and she says, look, I knew this was definitely Bobby. She claimed that he seemed a little standoffish when she introduced herself in person. Like he knew her, but he couldn't quite place her. She said it was just kind of odd. He didn't rebuff her. He wasn't like, get out of here. I have no idea who you are. It was just kind of a somewhat familiar, but not totally familiar with you encounter. Now, she thought that was odd given that they had been talking for a while, but they had never met face to face. And she said, okay, the bar was really loud. It was really dark. And she's like, and he probably had a few too many drinks at the time. So she said a quick goodbye, nice to see you. He exchanged pleasantry with her and she returned to her friends. After that, Kirat said that Bobby sort of went off the radar for some time, with his messages getting fewer until the time where he got divorced and he actually left England for a new life in Kenya, where he remarried. Now, he invited Kirat to his wedding, but she couldn't make it because, you can't always make it to Kenya for a wedding.
Yeah. So you said he didn't message her for a little while, and then I'm assuming they started connecting again at some point.
Yeah, what she said was not necessarily that he never messaged her, just that the messages got fewer. And, she chalked it up to he met someone else. He got divorced.
Yeah.
He met someone.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a new life that he's embarking on. He was quite busy.
Did she ever have romantic feelings for him, or it was always platonic on her end?
Not at this time. No,
Okay.
It was very platonic. She said that was just the tone of the conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And so after this, life went on. Kirat kind of stopped hearing from Bobby after he remarried and after she couldn't make the wedding. And at that time, she was on again with her partner. So it seemed like they both went on with their lives. Now, that is until November 2013, when Kirat saw a post in her Facebook feed saying that Bobby had been shot in Kenya. And unfortunately, his condition was quite critical.
Was this a post from his account or a mutual friend?
It was a post from a mutual friend.
Mm-hmm.
It was not directly from his account. But she hadn't heard about Bobby for, I want to say, close to maybe 2 years, a little bit under. So she was really shocked that the first time she has heard about him is he's been critically wounded. She followed his progress online, and apparently her cousin, remember Simran, who dated Bobby's younger brother, JJ? Well, she'd kept in touch with Bobby as well online, and she also knew what was going on with him. So through Simran, Kirat learned that Bobby was in a coma for some time. Eventually, though, he woke up, and shortly after he woke up, he reached out online to Kirat, even though it had been a couple of years since they had spoken. And I don't know if he was reconnecting with everyone. He did have a group of people who was following his progress as well. Kirat was not alone in that. So he reached out and said that he remembered her, but he didn't remember too much, his memory having faded quite a bit from being shot. He sustained a number of injuries, but he had remembered that she was just such a kind soul to him, to his brother, and that they had an online friendship on Facebook that, he would be happy to keep connected with her again. Now, Kirat was grateful that Bobby was alive, but just as quickly as that good news arrived, so did the opposite. You see, Bobby's condition worsened very quickly after he made contact with Kirat, with him suffering strokes, heart attacks, and blood clots, all very serious, and all in a short time. And then, shockingly, Bobby died.
Oh.
Now, this is two brothers in the same family.
Yeah.
Kirat received the message on Facebook in a group message. Remember I said there were people following him? There was about 40 friends and family who had been staying in touch. They were praying for Bobby, tracking his condition, and now they were all grieving his loss. And Kirat said that she felt awful. Like this was just devastating to her. First finding out, it was like a roller coaster. First finding out that he was injured, then that he was better, then they reconnected, and now he's died. It was very sad. Her sadness lasted for several months until one day in spring of 2014, Simran, her cousin, came to tell her a secret, and it was a big one. She said, I have to tell you something. The secret? Bobby was not dead at all. Because of the shooting, he had to pretend he was, as he was now in some type of protective custody, almost like a witness protection program.
Why? Was he involved in was it like organized crime? Was it a drug cartel?
That was a good question, and they weren't sure at the time if he was the target, so that's why they had him protected, because it was so serious and because he had almost died. And they did not know at the time if he was actually the target of the shooting or if it was an accident.
Now, did he really get better, then get worse again, or he never got worse? That was just all part of the ruse.
He did get worse. He had many medical conditions, and they persist. The blood clotting, the heart attacks, and the strokes, you'll see, happen over and over again. So, yes, he was absolutely sick.
Okay.
Simran also said that he was two things. He was in very bad condition medically, as you just asked, but also because of him possibly being a target, the government had moved him to the United States for his own protection. Now, Kirat was totally befuddled by this news, but much to her surprise, a few months later, Bobby again contacted her via Facebook to thank her for her enduring friendship and apologize for the misinformation that had been given.
Okay.
They continued their online relationship now that Bobby was safe, And a few friends and family were becoming privy to the information that he was alive. As time passed and his security seemed to be okay and he was relocated, he was allowed to inform some of the people about his condition.
Was he still married, his wife and child back in Kenya, or they're with him now in the United States?
Well, remember, he had a child with his first wife, but they divorced and he remarried. So I'll get to her in 1 minute. But the child was with his first wife, just to be clear. And at this point, Bobby was alive, but he still wasn't well medically. As I said, he experienced a lot of setbacks with strokes and other conditions. He required many operations and essentially round-the-clock medical care. Now, his medical team and friends were very good about staying in touch with Kirat and a small group of friends and family that were privy to this information, keeping them up to date on his condition. And Bobby seemed to be able to reestablish some of his social connections. Now, you asked about his wife. It seemed that his new wife had visited Bobby at first. Remember, she's not from the United States either. But eventually, I think that she vanished from his life. There's not much explanation of this, but you might speculate that it was because of the travel, the stress of his condition. There are many factors, I think, that would have had a really negative impact, possibly, on a new marriage. Again, this is speculation. So, Amy, you might think that this is a weird time to fall in love. However, that's exactly what happened. But not between Bobby and his ex-wife, between Bobby and Kirat. On Valentine's Day of 2015, after communicating solidly for almost a year, Kirat and Bobby agreed to be romantically involved, even though they had only met once in person. And Kirat had said that she wasn't even sure Bobby was going to live the year out. Like at that point, she wasn't convinced that he was going to survive. So she almost felt like, what's the harm in having this relationship? I care about this person. It might also be for him, for his mental, being and wellness. Almost like she was doing it for him, but she did care about him.
How did this happen? He just said, like, will you be my girlfriend? Or like the conversations just got more romantic? Like, it's not clear how things shifted.
Yeah, they had been having conversations where she said they had become more intimate. And I don't mean necessarily romantic, but they became closer and closer. She became one of his confidants. They just became closer naturally and as time progressed. And it seemed as if, though, he was now on his own without his wife anymore. And she said they just established a closer relationship. And it happened, believe it or not, naturally, up to the point where you would have a natural conversation with someone you were in a relationship with about making it monogamous. And that's what happened.
So I'm assuming she was now broken up with the guy she was with.
Yes, that's correct. She had been. She was not in another relationship anymore. What happened was they started using Skype to talk to each other. Remember Skype?
Of course. It's still around, no?
I guess. I don't know. I never really used it, and I haven't used it in years.
My dad doesn't have an iPhone, so I want to do a video call with him. We use Skype.
Oh, okay. Fine. Fair enough. Listen, I know nothing about technology, so that would make sense. However, even though they were using Skype, Bobby still mostly typed, just so you know, because the operations and injuries that he had, some of them involved substantial vocal cord injuries. Like, he was injured in every part of his body. Everything was affected. So he couldn't really speak very well. So he did a lot of typing.
What about video? Was it video calls?
No, most of them were not video calls either.
So why even go to Skype? It seems like just stay on Messenger.
Well, they did speak. It's just that it was a mix.
Okay.
And Kirat would speak as well. And I think it was their way of establishing a more intimate connection for sure. The connection didn't allow, though, where he was for video. And I don't believe that anyone wanted him on video at the time.
Okay.
Remember, he's still in some type of protective custody.
Okay.
So I'm not sure that he should be on Skype at all, to be perfectly honest. Nonetheless, Kirat would also send audio notes to him, and they continued to use Facebook Messenger. I mean, this was an odd romance, but as Kirat said, it was love. However, there were quickly signs of early turmoil in the relationship. Bobby threatened self-harm at times and seemed to challenge Kirat's affection in those moments. He was having a hard time adjusting, and I think that when he didn't feel like Kirat was paying enough attention to him or didn't love him enough or didn't care enough, he would say things to that nature. Well, I'm just going to do this to myself because nobody loves me. It's clear you don't care. And she said that happened pretty early on.
I'm assuming she wasn't allowed to visit him. So there wasn't even an option of them meeting in person because he was in protection?
Not at the time. No, she was not allowed to visit him at the time. And I don't know that she even had the resources to if she could. Possibly. I'm sure she would have maybe found a way, but I'm not sure what her financial situation was at the time. She said that Bobby had also somehow found a way to smuggle alcohol inside the hospital, as well as getting himself outside the hospital to drink. So he had somehow gotten alcohol in, gotten out to get this alcohol because he was having such a hard time, and this was one of his ways of coping with stress. Obviously, she was extremely concerned about him drinking, especially when his body was not recuperating. But for Kirat, the most distressing part was really his increasingly threatening behavior. Kirat became depressed, she said. She began to isolate herself, only having contact with Bobby and his team. And I mean his team of professionals, his team of friends, his family. But she said at that point on the podcast, her friends also said that Kirat wasn't the social person she was anymore. Mm-hmm. She wasn't really connected with the outside world in the way that she was before she met Bobby. There was one person with whom she still was close enough, though, and that was her cousin Simran. Now, this is where things get very interesting. Simran had been approved to visit Bobby in the United States.
Why?
I'm not sure why, but, well, I can tell you that I don't know if Bobby just wasn't allowed to receive visitors at all, or certain times, or special approval. But Simran had a very high level, even though she was young, had obtained a very high level financial job for which she had to travel to the United States a lot. And that was paid for by her company. And she had somehow received permission on one occasion to visit Bobby. I don't know how or why. But I see your eyes like, this is kind of odd.
Yeah.
For Kirat, though, this was kind of reassuring. You know, she had never really seen Bobby outside the bar. She didn't know about his medical condition. She believed everything Bobby had said, don't get me wrong. Mm-hmm. But the fact that her cousin had met with him and seen what was going on in his life, it gave Kirat reassurance. But Kirat and Bobby's relationship continued to deteriorate. They were very close, but unhealthily close, you might argue. And Kirat said that the closer they grew, the meaner and more controlling Bobby seemed to become. Kirat said that the threats of self-harm and suicide increased when he felt she wasn't paying attention to him or didn't love him enough. This was almost a way of him gaining her attention back.
You said Simran went to visit him. Was that did she already go at this point?
She had already gone at this point, and she came back. It was a short visit.
She reported back.
Yeah, she told Kirat, I saw him.
Okay.
She said, I've seen him. This is what he looks like. This is what he seems like. So she seemed to substantiate his location, the medical story, the important facts that you might be wondering about after this time.
Any pictures or anything?
No, she wasn't allowed to take pictures.
Okay.
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
But it gave Kirat reassurance to go on with the relationship. But as she went on, she said things did get worse. She said that Bobby also monopolized all of her time via messaging and phone calls to the point where she wasn't sleeping enough. Friends said that Kirat began to lose a lot of weight, alarmingly so. Kirat said that she became very emotionally distraught and depressed, so much so that she quit one of her jobs, I think her primary job. After about a year like this, Kirat said that she wanted to leave the relationship. She loved Bobby. She really wanted a future with him, but it had become so volatile that she just didn't feel like she could continue. But she felt really guilty because every time she would try to exit the relationship, Bobby would threaten to take his own life, saying that Kirat was the only thing he had come to live for, and how could she possibly do that to him? Now, Bobby was also a loose cannon, though, going from pining after Kirat and romancing her to turning on her and becoming very nasty for reasons she really couldn't understand. I just want to give you an example of a few texts from Bobby. These were at different times, but at one point, Kirat said she was studying. She was going to school. I can't recall for what at the time, but she was staying in to study. And Bobby's response was, "Why are you studying now? So you can get a proper job because I'm not like your ex who tolerate you going out?" On another text message, he said, "You aren't as innocent as you make yourself out to be. Biggest fucking joke." Then in another text message, when they were in some type of heated discussion, he says, "Fuck it, I'm going out with Maria for a walk. Don't bother calling me tonight." Maria was one of his nurses with whom he'd grown close. And that
Okay.
was also some kind of threat to Kirat, that I'm going to be going out with Maria.
Did he have a head injury?
That's a great question. I don't know specifically, but I also don't know the way in which he was affected by clots and strokes and other things. But I don't know specifically.
This sounds like an extreme personality change that sometimes happens after one has a head injury.
That's a very good call, actually, and I would have to agree with that. But Kirat said that when he was picking fights with her, which became very often, her behavior altered. She would take drives, listen to this, just so her hands were occupied so she couldn't pick up her phone and respond, because she was always on her phone with him, responding to him, calling him, and it became an obsession, but also something, it was a cycle she couldn't get out of. So she said putting her hands on the wheel was a way she literally could refrain from being on her phone.
Sounds so unhealthy.
Which sounds terrifying,
Yeah.
doesn't it? But it was so much worse than even this, Amy, because listen to this. When the pair were on Skype, oftentimes, if Bobby would become very upset, like go to 100, get like to the top of, where he could be, he would have a medical emergency that required intervention while Kirat was literally on Skype with him, and she'd have to listen on the other line as, let's say, Bobby's condition, like he had a heart attack or something would happen.
What do you mean she would hear like the beeping and the people running in?
Yes, people running in. She said this was not infrequent. This happened. So that became another reason she was really afraid to end the relationship. Now, this went on for a couple of years and really became all-consuming in her life. The reason you might ask, why would she hold out? He's in the United States. He's injured. How is this relationship ever going to come to fruition? Well, there came a time where Bobby was seemingly improving and where he said that the protection program he was in, they were becoming less concerned about his safety. They couldn't find any specific threat that was directed towards him and that he might have just unfortunately been some collateral consequence of another crime. So what Bobby said was that he'd be able to return to the UK soon, and they would actually be able to establish this real life connection and relationship that they had both been waiting so long for. And so Kirat had hope. Okay. And she also had hope that Bobby was such a kind person before this accident. And so many of these things, as you said, happened, but maybe it was because of his medical condition. Unfortunately, a lot of these promises just didn't seem to materialize, or they didn't seem to happen in a timely fashion. And when Kirat wasn't on the phone with Bobby, she was talking to one of his cousins or another family member. People were always calling Kirat to let her know, like to thank her for being so supportive, to let her like reassure her how much Bobby loved her, that they would be together. So she felt like even when things weren't, like promises weren't happening or they were being broken, there were always reinforcements supporting Bobby and supporting their relationship. Miraculously, in February of 2018, now also remember, this is 8 years after their first contact.
Okay.
Although they had a break where they didn't speak for a couple of years. In 2018, Bobby's promise of coming to the UK finally came true. He had come to London, checked into a hotel, and Kirat was ecstatic. She could not wait to see him. But it wouldn't be that easy, would it? Much to Kirat's surprise, instead of being excited to finally see each other in person, Bobby said he still felt very unwell after his trip and he wasn't ready to see Kirat yet.
Okay.
She was really disappointed and really surprised. Although she tried to be understanding, she didn't also know what he physically looked like and wondered maybe if there was something he didn't want her to see, if maybe he was scared. So she said she tried to be patient, but he refused to see her on a number of occasions. So she decided, forget this. I'm going to his hotel and I'm going to force him to see me. Like, we're in the same country. We're in London. So she was determined to finally see him. So imagine her confusion when the front desk told her that they didn't have anyone by the name of Bobby staying there. But Bobby contacted her right away and said, look, I'm here. I just said that I did not, I didn't want any visitors. You were included. I'm sorry. But Kirat just could not understand this. Why would he come all the way to England and have no interest in seeing her? He also had cancer at this point, unfortunately, and that was a revelation that I don't think he wanted to reveal, but did. So I think he was also weakened by cancer, which he had said. And, Kirat pretty much surmised that he just didn't want to see her because he was so sick and he's not the man that she had hoped for. But I have to say, she was also lying to her family because they were asking, Bobby's here, you're seeing him, right? And she was so embarrassed that she said, well, of course I'm seeing him and you'll get to meet him. This went on for like weeks and eventually a couple of months. And after Bobby just refused to see her, after time had gone on, Kirat hired a private investigator to look into him because now she really was so suspicious and she had just many questions and she was so distraught at this point. So the private investigator came back and provided her with an address in Brighton, saying that's where Bobby lived. Now, remember, she had seen him in Brighton, but she thought this couldn't be possible because he didn't. This was an old address, but he had moved. But not knowing what was going on, she said she just got in her car and drove there to confront Bobby if he was, in fact, in the UK and lived there and there was some type of scam going on here. She just didn't know what else to do. So she drove to this home, the address the private investigator had given her. When she got there and knocked on his door, Bobby's ex-wife opened the door, or at least who Kirat believed was Bobby's ex-wife. And she was holding their child. But one thing that seemed clear, she was not his ex-wife at all. In fact, the two were very much married still.
And is this the same baby from years ago? Because this baby should be older by now.
Actually, this might have been a second child.
Okay.
She was holding, let's put it this way, she was holding a child of theirs and they were still married. This might have been a second child, though. A shocked Kirat demanded to speak with Bobby. And when he came face to face with her, she yelled at him, "How could you?" To which Bobby acted very surprised, telling her that he had no idea what she was talking about. When she pressed him, Bobby claimed that she had the wrong person, but Kirat pulled out the pictures of him and noted, hey, you don't, this is you, and you sure don't look sick like you've been telling me for years. It seemed like Bobby was very confused, though, and Kirat thought it was an act. She was getting angry. So the only thing she could think to do was call Simran, because Simran had kind of known Bobby, known them both. And with Bobby there, she called Simran and told her what was going on. And even Bobby got on the phone, asking Simran about her cousin and what was going on, saying they were both really confused, to which Simran also seemed surprised and totally confused. She didn't know what was going on either. Was Bobby acting? Was he faking this in front of his wife? But she was kind of the calming force saying, we'll figure this out, guys.
So Simran had seen Bobby in the United States, right?
Yes.
Okay, and there's got to be some crazy twist here because I don't even understand how this could all be. So continue.
Yeah, I'm getting there. Literally sick to her stomach and hysterical, Kirat got back in her car and returned to London. She had no idea what else to do. Bobby would not acknowledge this. This whole time, this is what she believed. This whole time, Bobby had obviously been lying because he was still married. So that he had to fake this, surprise and confusion in front of his wife. So Kirat decides to go file a report with the police. I'm not sure what they could have done in this situation or what the charges were, but her cousin Simran went with her as well to file charges. I think it was like fraud charges. But the next day on June 11th, 2018, while at her home, Simran came to visit and she had something to tell Kirat. And what she told Kirat was that she had lied about that visit with Bobby where she said that she saw him. Well, she said that Bobby had urged her to just tell Kirat she had gotten a visit because Kirat maybe didn't believe everything. He wanted to placate Kirat. He wanted to make her happy. And Simran was, if Simran had seen him, that this would reassure her, as I said, or assuage any type of doubts Kirat might be having at this point. Okay, but this wasn't the full story either. And Kirat at this point was really angry with Simran, and she was really confused. But shortly after, during this visit, Simran dropped the real bomb. And you will not believe what she had to say. Simran confessed that she was Bobby, or that she had pretended to be him for all of these years.
Wait, what?
Exactly.
I would have never. I mean, I knew it was clear that this was a scam, but why would Simran do this to her cousin?
Well, In fact, Bobby was a real man, as we knew.
Yes,
The one
but-
that Kirat met and confronted, but he had no involvement.
He's a victim.
Yes.
He's a victim here too.
He had no involvement in this scam and no idea who Kirat really was. He had only known Kirat as well through a picture and the Sikh community. So remember when he met her at the bar?
And this also, yeah, I was just going to say, this explains why he was kind of confused.
But listen to this. Before we get to the why, Simran had concocted
Yeah.
the whole relationship. And think about all the years of communications. But not only that, that whole cast of characters, all the personalities involved, the friends, the family, the medical personnel, they were all Simran. The Facebook group of 40 people, all Simran.
So Kirat never got on the phone with any of these other people. All of the messages were typed messages as far as like the family members, the doctors, all of these people.
No, she did get on the phone with some of them, and they all had different voices and personalities, though
What?
most of the contacts were online.
I don't even understand how this is. How old is Simran? At this point, Simran's in her 20s.
Well, at this point, Kirat is about 40, so Simran would be close to 30. Remember, this went on over, it went on over 8 years. I think I think Kirat was approaching 40, and Simran was in her late 20s.
Did Simran really have this high-powered job, or she didn't have a job? Because how do you have time?
She did have this high-powered job.
How do you have
Yes.
time to
How
do
do you
all
have the
this?
time? She found the time.
I have so many
shockingly.
questions. What could this motivation possibly be? I don't even know where to start.
I really got you with this one too, huh? It wasn't registering for Kirat either, by the way. She was shocked. She fell to the floor, unable to stand on her own. And at this point, Simran did not give her an explanation. Worst of all, Amy, Kirat said that Simran just didn't seem remorseful at all. She said something to the effect of, "I've just ruined my own life," and then left Kirat's home, leaving Kirat hysterical on the floor.
Okay, so she's clearly a sociopath. I don't even understand. I need to know everything about this woman. None of this makes sense to me.
I know. Before we get to her, though, we just have to turn to Kirat really quickly. I mean, we are talking about a decade of psychological and emotional torture. It was physically taxing on Kirat, on every part of her life. And then later that day or the next day, Kirat also received a visit from Simran's parents, who were very concerned about Simran and not Kirat. They explained to Kirat that they would repay any money Simran had taken. Now, there wasn't much money in this scheme. It was not financially motivated. It was some nominal amount of money Kirat had spent on maybe small expenses. I don't recall what it was, but it really wasn't the point. Simran's parents, get this, also offered to pay for Kirat's counseling if she wanted, but they didn't seem to acknowledge that it was Simran who had been the deceiver here and who likely needed behavioral counseling. I have to tell you, victim blaming, just so you know, would become an unfortunate theme to this story as well. Now, at this point, Kirat decided to contact the police again, not knowing what else to do, even though Simran's family and her own family had asked her not to keep this a private family matter.
Because it's embarrassing.
But she decided she was going to file charges against her cousin.
I'll be interested to hear what kind of charges.
Yeah, well, the police didn't seem very interested either, as maybe you could have guessed. Kirat even overheard an officer questioning her sanity at one point. And they told her at the time, look, we can't pursue charges because catfishing isn't a crime. And if anyone's the victim, it was Bobby, because his identity was stolen to perpetrate the fraud. And Bobby had actually filed charges as well against Simran when he realized what had happened. And his claims were acknowledged by the police.
So did he have his own Facebook account, or Simran made a duplicate Facebook account, or how did she hack into his stuff?
She made her own account with his information. Yeah, she was not.
Because he would have seen these messages.
She created a separate Facebook page.
Gotcha.
Is how she did. Is how I understand it.
Okay.
At this point, the prevailing attitude seemed to be that this was some type of family prank that had gone too far, and that Kirat should simply move on with her life. There was very little sympathy for her, and it was framed as her problem. Now, while Kirat's life was crumbling around her, her identity now totally changed. And think about this, years of her life taken. Simran was seemingly unaffected by what she had done to her cousin. In fact, get this, Simran was still posting about her life on Facebook, and apparently she had received a pretty big promotion at her job to vice president of a financial institution where she worked. And this was not a scam, this was true. She was going on vacations and appeared to be living her life.
Don't understand.
How could this be? Why did she do this? And would this be the end of the story? Would Kirat ever be able to hold Simran accountable? Well, that's a complicated answer and one you'll have to join us for in part 2 of the Kirat Assi story to find out. On that note, we'd like to end today's episode and invite you all to join us next week for part 2 of the Kirat Assi story. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll catch you next time on Women in Crime. Women in Crime is written and hosted by Meghan Sachs and Amy Shlosberg. Our producer is James Varga. Script editing is by Abagail Belcastro. Audio editing is by Siler Burr and Jose Alfonzo. And music is by Desert Media. If you enjoy the show, please remember to follow and leave a review. You can also support the show through Patreon, where you can get access to additional ad-free content such as exclusive full-length episodes, lectures, a book club, and virtual happy hours with Meghan and Amy. For more information, visit patreon.com/womenandcrime. Sources for today's episode include The Guardian, the podcast Sweet Bobby, Vice News, Vogue, and the Staffordshire Police Coercive Behavior Guide.